Officers, present arms. In 1986, the Park Forest Police Department Awards Board was formed through a general order. The board is comprised of members who have been selected from each of the 4 patrol platoons, the Investigations Division, the Records Division, and the ranks of corporal, commander, along with one of the deputy chiefs. During each quarter, members of that board meet and go over the award nominations. Strict criteria must be met, and those whose actions merit recognition receive various awards. Only 4 officers remain from that 1986 original staff, but tradition remains firmly intact, as this morning we will, for the 28th time, present one of our officers with the Park Forest Officer of the Year Award. In 2004, the honor ceremony was created to publicly acknowledge those actions not only by our officers, but also those citizens meriting special recognition. Today, we shall honor those who have made that high grade. We encourage family members and guests to join the award recipients on the stage and ask that you line up with them on the right side of the stadium in order indicated in the program. It is now my honor and pleasure to bring the rest of the senior staff of the Park Forest Police Department on the stage. Officers and staff, please stand. I would now like to introduce the senior staff. Starting at the right, Record Supervisor Pam Jones. Administrations Commander Steve Coe. Commander Ryan Reisky. Commander Scott Sheets. Commander Devin Strait. Commander Mike Law. Commander Paul Winfrey. Deputy Chief of Administration Chris Menino. Chief of Police Clifford Butts.
Good morning and welcome.
Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, since we last met for our annual honor ceremony 1 year ago, 108 police officers have been killed in the line of duty. 108 families have been forever changed. 108 police agencies suffered the loss of a comrade. And we as a nation have lost 108 brave men and women in the fight to preserve safety and liberties. Additionally, within the past year, our own police family has lost retired Police Sergeant William Clayton and former Fire and Police Commissioner Ida Calloway. Please join us in a moment of silence to remember those we've lost, both as a nation and as a police department, and anyone that's near your heart. personally like to thank retired Riverdale police officer John Dempsey from the Bagpipes and Drums of Chicago Police Department Emerald Society for playing at our ceremony. I would now like to introduce Senior Trustee May Brandon for some opening remarks.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
On behalf of Mayor Ostenberg, who's unable to be with us this morning, and the Board of Trustees, I take this opportunity to welcome you to the 10th Annual Police Awards ceremony. This is a very special occasion. I've been able to attend all 10 of them, and I have to say that from attending the first one, it gave me an opportunity to just kind of get a glimpse of what goes on in our officers' day. I think as ordinary citizens, we see them driving around, or we call and they come to answer a call for us, but we really don't have a sense of what their day is all about. And this is an opportunity for us to recognize the great work that our police department does. It's also a day for us to recognize the citizens who assume the responsibility of not turning a back on anything that they seem suspicious, and work with our police department to make our community the safe one that it is. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce, a couple of our trustees who are here. Trustee Gary Kobaczynski, there on the back, and Trustee Jerome Brown. And I believe that is it. But I'm not going to say any further remarks, but Mayor Ostenberg does send you a message, and so I'm going to share that message with you at this time. Public servants too often are criticized for their work performance, rather than properly praised for the outstanding contributions they make to community well-being. It is for that reason that I hold so dearly this annual ceremony that recognizes our police officers for the exceptional work they do on behalf of the residents of the Village of Park Forest. Unfortunately, I am unable to be present for today's ceremony because of my attendance at the annual Congress of Cities of the National League of Cities in Seattle. However, my spirit certainly is with all of you here in this room. I offer my most sincere congratulations to all of you who are being honored today, both our police officers and the citizens who have helped them in ensuring that justice is served. I would be remiss if I did not include a word of praise for the leadership of the Park Forest Police Department. Chief Cliff Butts, the deputy chiefs, and all command staff are to be commended for the excellent direction they provide day to day for the officers in the field. To all, congratulations on jobs well done, Mayor John A. Ostenberg. And again, let me thank you all for attending, and congratulations to all of our officers, our staff for a job well done, and to those citizens who participated. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Brandon. I will now present the Citizens Award. If there are any citizens receiving awards, please move to the right side of the stage along the wall. The Citizen Award shall be awarded to any citizens whose actions were instrumental in the apprehension of a criminal and/or extraordinary actions to help protect life and/or property. A fitting quote from Edwin Burke: "All that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing." Bridget Jones Williams and Susanna Lerner. On January 14, 2013, at 11 a.m., Bridget Jones Williams was looking out of her window in her backyard and observed an unknown male subject run through her backyard carrying 2 small flat-screen televisions. She immediately contacted the police with a detailed description of the subject. At the same time, Susanna Lerner heard the dog barking and went to investigate. She observed an unknown male subject running down her street carrying 2 small flat-screen televisions. She also contacted the police department with a detailed description of the subject, who was stopped a short distance away from her house. She agreed to be taken to the scene of the stop and positively identified the subject as the one that she had seen with the televisions. With the subject admitted to the burglary and also committing 5 other burglaries. Bridget Jones Williams and Susanna Lerner are to be commended for being willing to get involved and call the police after noticing unusual behavior in their neighborhood. A burglar was taken into custody and proceeds were recovered along with other crimes being solved. The Citizen Award is presented to Bridget Jones Williams and Susanna Lerner. Harold Hammond. On January 29, 2013, at approximately 1 p.m., Harold Hammond observed 2 male subjects he did not recognize from the neighborhood walk up the driveway of 302 Wayne Street and enter the rear yard. Mr. Hammond knew both of the subjects did not reside at the residence and immediately called the police. Mr. Hammond was able to give a detailed clothing description of both suspects. While the police were en route, the suspects began to walk away and Hammond relayed the direction of travel to dispatch. When officers arrived on scene, both subjects fled on foot and one was apprehended. Mr. Hammond participated in a show-up of the detained offender who he was able to identify. The offender was arrested and gave a written statement admitting to the attempted residential burglary and identified the second subject who was located and also charged. Mr. Hammond should be commended for his awareness of suspicious activity around his neighborhood and the lack of hesitation to call the police. Mr. Hammond remained calm, went on the telephone with dispatch and gave a detailed description of the suspects. Mr. Hammond was the sole witness to this crime, and without his fast action and participating, this case would more than likely go unsolved. A Citizen Award is presented to Harold Hammond. Jamiya Gail. On March 3rd, 2013, Southcom Dispatch received a call from an 8-year-old Jamiya Gail about her mother being unconscious and in need of medical attention. Jamiya provided dispatch with her address and all necessary information while remaining calm throughout the whole ordeal. When paramedics and officers arrived on scene, Jamiya met them outside and directed the paramedics to the bedroom where her mom was at. Paramedics initiated treatment and rushed Jamiya's mother to the hospital. Jamiya should be commended on knowing when and how to use 911. She recognized her mother being in distress and in need of medical attention. Despite being only 8 years old, Jamiya remained calm and acted with bravery despite a very stressful situation. Due to Jamiya's actions, her mother was rushed to the hospital, received timely medical treatment, and made a full recovery. The Citizen Award is presented to Jamiya Gail. Christy Smith. On June 28, 2013, Park Forest water meter reader Christy Smith was working in an area of Ottawa Street when she saw two subjects enter a parked car, remove items and place them in a plastic garbage bag, then run away. She saw the two enter a dark-colored vehicle, which then sped away at a high rate of speed. Smith contacted the Park Forest Police Department and was able to provide officers with detailed clothing descriptions of the two subjects. Shortly after this, a Madison police officer responded to the call of suspicious subjects attempting to enter vehicles at their metro lot. Those subjects were located and were found to be wearing clothes that matched Christy Smith's description of the offenders from Ottawa Street. The subjects were brought to the Park Forest Police Department, identified by Christy Smith as the ones seen entering the vehicle. The two subjects were interviewed and gave written confessions to having entered numerous vehicles, including the ones in Park Forest. Christy Smith is to be commended on her willingness to get involved. Not only did she see suspicious activity and call the police, she had the presence of mind to note the detail that they were wearing that led to them being later identified and eventually charged with burglary. The Citizen Award is presented to Christy Smith. Dr. Mary Bruce. On September 2nd, 2013, Dr. Mary Bruce observed two subjects acting suspicious while standing outside of a vehicle parked near her home. Her suspicions were heightened when one of the subjects walked off into the park despite the darkness of the hour. Dr. Bruce acted on her suspicions and contacted the Park Forest Police, giving a detailed description of her observations. While investigating the call, a pat-down was conducted by responding officers, and one of the subjects was found to have a loaded .22 caliber pistol in his pocket. And additional ammunition was recovered from inside of the vehicle. The 17-year-old was subsequently charged with aggravated unlawful use of a weapon and possession of a firearm ammunition with no FOIA as an adult, and the vehicle was seized under our local ordinance. Dr. Mary Bruce should be commended for practicing good citizenship in first, observing something out of the ordinary, and second, in notifying authorities what she observed. In this case, her suspicions were confirmed when a 17-year-old man was arrested for illegally possessing a loaded firearm with additional ammunition in his vehicle. Due to our observations and subsequent action, a dangerous weapon was taken off the streets of Park Forest, and a potential violent offender was arrested. The Citizen Award is presented to Dr. Mary Bruce. Penny Chamberlain and Elaine Garcia. On September 3rd, 2013, around noon, Park Forest Police were dispatched to the area of Oswego and Niagara in reference to a found child. Upon arrival, officers spoke to Penny Chamberlain and Elaine Garcia, who related that they were doing yard work and noticed a young child wandering down the middle of the street. Chamberlain and Garcia approached the child and attempted to speak to him. Chamberlain and Garcia did not see any adults that appeared to be looking for the child, and they did not recognize him from the area. Chamberlain and Garcia waited with the child until officers arrived. It was later discovered that the child was 2 years old and lived in the area, but had been left alone by his father. The father was charged with endangering the life of a child, and the child was released into the mother's care. Mrs. Chamberlain and Mrs. Garcia should be recognized for their attentiveness and willingness to become involved in a possibly dangerous situation. Without their quick thinking and immediate actions, this incident could have had a tragic ending. The Citizen Award is presented to Penny Chamberlain and Elaine Garcia. Village Trustee Jerome Baum will be accepting the Citizen Award on behalf of Mr. Del Toro, who could not be here today. On September 23rd, 2013, around 7 p.m., Park Forest Police were dispatched to 306 Sangamon Street to investigate a robbery of a juvenile. While units were in the area, Andres Del Toro flagged down officers and advised he had witnessed the robbery, which occurred moments prior near his residence. Mr. Del Toro advised that the offenders tried to take something from the victim, and that one of the offenders had dropped a baseball cap, which was recovered by Del Toro and turned over to the police. Mr. Del Toro provided officers with a detailed description of the two offenders and the locations in which they were last seen running. Mr. Del Toro further related that he believed the offenders may have been going to Salmonock Park. Officers located two juvenile offenders in Salmonock Park who were identified and taken into custody. The offenders were each charged with one count of attempted robbery and one count of aggravated battery. Mr. Del Toro went out of his way to assist a battered juvenile by providing police with detailed account of the incident, which was critical in locating and identifying the offenders. Without Mr. Del Toro's prompt actions, it is likely that the offenders may not have been located that day. Mr. Del Toro is commended for his willingness to become involved and help another Park Forest resident who was in need. The Citizen Award is presented to Andres Del Toro. The Outstanding Service Awards. The Outstanding Service Award shall be awarded to an officer or department staff whose action or service performed during routine duty would have been classified as outstanding or exceptional performance. A quote from Theodore Roosevelt: "We are face to face with our destiny, and we must meet it with a high and resolute courage. For us, it is the life of action, of strenuous performance of duty. Let us live in the harness, striving mightily. Let us rather run the risk of wearing out than rusting out." Police Officer Alex Bregan. On May 2nd, 2013, the Park Forest Police Department received a report of drug dealing being conducted at 350 Juniper Street. Police Officer Alex Bregan began surveillance of the area and at one point observed a hand-to-hand transaction between a subject and an occupant of the vehicle. The traffic stop was conducted on the vehicle, and both occupants were taken into custody and brought to the Park Forest Police Department for further investigation. Officer Bregan checked both subjects' criminal histories and requested a strip search based on the circumstances of the case, which was approved. While performing the search, Officer Bregan noticed what appeared to be a plastic bag containing narcotics protruding from the body cavity of one of the suspects. The suspect refused to allow the officers to remove the object, and a search warrant was obtained. Prior to the execution of the search warrant, the subject voluntarily removed the object, which contained numerous bags of crack cocaine. In addition, approximately $3,000 in cash was recovered from the vehicle and the suspect. The offender was subsequently evicted from the multifamily residence through crime-free housing. Despite having less than 2 years policing experience at the time, Officer Bregan's initiative and aggressive pursuit of narcotics complaint led to the recovery of crack cocaine, drug proceeds, and a drug dealer being taken off the streets of Park Forest. The Outstanding Service Award is presented to Police Officer Alex Bregan. Detective John Deso. Detective Deso will be receiving 4 outstanding service awards. Please hold your applause till all the awards have been read. On May 14, 2013, Park Forest Police responded to an aggravated battery incident in which a 15-year-old victim was hit in the mouth hard enough that the jaw was broken. The victim did not know the offender and had only seen him in the park where the incident occurred. The victim later underwent surgery, receiving a plate, 2 mini plates, and 8 screws to repair his jaw. Detective John Deso was assigned the case, but had very little to go on. Detective Deso was able to identify one subject who was present. After conversations with that subject, several other individuals were identified. Those individuals directed Detective Deso to a 15-year-old suspect with whom Detective Deso was familiar with. That suspect was arrested and was immediately uncooperative, threatening police and cursing. Detective Deso was able to calm the suspect down and interview him. After the initial outburst, the juvenile offender, in the presence of his guardian, gave a confession admitting to the aggravated battery. He was charged with that offense. As a result of Detective Deso's tenacity, dedication, and interviewing skills, with very little to go on, the offender of this violent incident was arrested, charged, and he and his family were removed from the community through the crime-free housing program. On June 1st, 2013, Park Forest Police responded to Salmon Park for a report of a 12-year-old juvenile who had been robbed of a gold chain. Responding officers spoke to the victim, who related that he had been held down by the offender, and the offender had stolen his chain and fled. A vague description of the offender was given, and no other information was learned. Detective Deso was assigned the case. Detective Deso showed the victim multiple photo arrays that were created using knowledge of known offenders in the area who matched the vague description provided by the victim. The victim picked out the offender, a 17-year-old individual with a history of felony crimes. Detective Deso began looking for this offender. After several weeks of looking, police officers located the offender and he was arrested. At the station, the offender at first denied any involvement, but eventually, through the rapport that Detective Deso had established with the offender, he admitted that he had stolen the chain and sold it in Chicago. The offender was charged as an adult with strong arm robbery. This case went from a robbery in which nothing was known about the offender to a solved incident solely due to the knowledge and its application by Detective Deso. On July 22, 2013, Park Forest Police responded to an armed robbery incident that had just occurred, in which 2 teenage victims were robbed at knife point. Their cell phones, money, and an iPod were taken. The victims knew the nickname of one of the offenders, but the armed offender was unknown. Detective Deso was assigned the case. Detective Deso was able to have the victim identify one of the offenders through a photo array. Through his experience working for the police department and at the local high school, he recognized the description of the second offender and was able to identify him as a 19-year-old from the neighborhood who had never been arrested. The victims identified that subject as the other offender. Within several days, both offenders were located after Detective Deso prepared wanted flyers for them. They were identified by the victim through physical lineups. Although initially denying involvement, both offenders eventually confessed to committing the armed robbery. As a result of the arrest and interviews, the weapons were recovered, as well as the iPod and the charger of one of the victim's phones. In addition, Detective Deso utilized specialized training to retrieve incriminating statements from both offenders via the use of social media sites. Those statements were preserved and will be used at trial. Both offenders were charged with armed robbery. As a result of all of Detective Deso's knowledge of local offenders, dedication, and superior interviewing skills, 2 armed robbers were charged and removed from the streets of Park Forest. On September 20th, 2013, the robbery was reported at the bus stop on Nauvoo Street. In this incident, several offenders knocked down a 16-year-old victim and stole his cell phone and book bag. The victim knew the name of the offender from school, but the other offenders' identities were unknown. Detective Deso was assigned and immediately started this investigation. Detective Deso made contact with staff in Crete Mooney High School, where the offenders were believed to attend school. They provided names of the individuals who ride the same school bus as the victim. Detective Dussault later drove the victim to various bus stops in an attempt to locate the offenders. Detective Dussault, working closely with administrators at Crete-Mooney High School, identified the other offender and others present. The offenders were arrested and interviewed. Despite numerous denials, they eventually admitted to the robbery. A cell phone camera photograph was also located that showed that the robbery as it was happening. One adult offender and one juvenile offender were each charged with robbery in the incident. As this type of strong-arm robbery becomes more frequent, it is diligent work like that exhibited by Detective Dussault that gives Park Force officers a reputation as an agency that completes its mission and catches the offenders. 4 Outstanding Service Awards are presented to Detective John Dussault.
Never going to be forgiven.
Police Officer Charlie Hoskins. On June 10, 2013, Officer Charlie Hoskins assisted in a robbery investigation that occurred during the day shift. The offender's description was given, but despite the efforts of the officers made to locate the offender at the time, they were unsuccessful and the offender's identity was unknown. Approximately 1 hour later, after his tour of duty had ended, Officer Hoskins traveled to a local store to pick up some personal items. While inside the store, he observed a group of juveniles injured. Among the group was the subject who matched the description of the offender. Officer Hoskins engaged in a conversation with the subjects. Suspicions of the explanations provided by the juvenile of his recent whereabouts, Officer Hoskins contacted the on-duty shift, documenting the identities of the subjects. This information was used to conduct a lineup with the victim and witnesses, and where the suspect was identified. The offender was subsequently arrested and admitted to his involvement in this crime, and he was charged. Even while off duty, Officer Hoskins has shown his dedication to law enforcement and his ability to recall important information related to an investigation. Due to his tenacity for arresting criminals, this case was brought to a successful conclusion. Officer Hoskins, the Outstanding Service Award is presented to Police Officer Charlie Hoskins.
And yes, it is a boy. Finally.
Community Service Officer James Jamiya. At the time of this award was earned, Officer Jamiya was a community service officer. He has since been sworn in as a police officer and is currently in field training. On January 29, 2013, Park Force officers were dispatched to assist the fire department with a female who had fallen in front of 235 Arcadia Street and was injured. The female had her pit bull dog with her on a leash, and the dog was extremely protective of her. The dog would not allow the paramedics to come anywhere near her. Community Service Officer James Jamiak responded. While the owner was losing grip on the leash and kept advising that the dog would attack anyone near her, CSO Jamiak was able to slowly work his way close enough to the dog to get a noose on it. putting himself at risk in the game control, allowing the paramedics to take care of the injured woman. CSO Jamiya is to be commended for his diligence and ability to remain calm during a highly tense situation, concentrate on the task at hand, and complete the mission. The Outstanding Service Award is presented to CSO James Jamiya, now Patrol Officer Jamiya. Police Officer Robert Johnson. On November 15, 2012, Police Officer Robert Johnson was dispatched to Aunt Martha's group home to take a runaway report. After searching the surrounding area, Officer Johnson observed the runaway crouching near some garbage cans, lifting the lid and throwing something inside of it. The subject then ran around the building and Officer Johnson pursued, watching him throwing more items. Officer Johnson stopped the subject and after speaking with him, detained him, went back to the area where he saw him hiding and recovered numerous items around the building that appeared to be proceeds from a burglary. The runaway, now suspect, was taken into custody and after the investigation and interrogation, he was charged with 2 counts of burglary and items were returned to their rightful owners. Officer Johnson is commended for his dedication, which turned a simple runaway report into the clearance of several felonies and the return of property to its rightful owner. The Outstanding Service Award is presented to Police Officer Robert Johnson. Records Clerk Janet Martin. On October 20th, 2013, Park Force officers were dispatched to 319 Todd Street for a disturbance where a gun was involved. It was later determined to be a murder-suicide. Additional investigative resources were summoned and responded to the scene and the police department. Victims, witnesses, and family members were brought to the police department to be interviewed by investigators. Record Clerk Janet Martin directed South Suburban Major Crimes Task Force members where to assemble, and investigators began speaking with witnesses and family members at the police department. During this time, other family members were arriving at the police department, becoming loud and demanding to see those who had come to speak to the investigators. The subjects in the lobby became so loud and disruptive that subjects waiting to be interviewed exited their front interview rooms and approached the records clerk's door to see what was wrong. Records Clerk Martin, utilizing her communication skills, were able to calm the subjects in the interview rooms and keep them from trying to leave the station. Martin was able to calm the people at the window demanding to see their family members who were in the interview rooms. Martin helped to maintain control over the interior of the police station while officers were managing a crime scene. She was able to assist in allowing witnesses to utilize washroom facilities, answering incoming department phone calls and requests at the front window. Investigators were then able to help manage the subjects being interviewed and those who were waiting at the police department lobby. Janet Martin, as a seasoned records clerk and former dispatcher, was able to assist in maintaining control over the police department, direct responding investigators, and manage loud and obnoxious family members who had congregated in the lobby waiting for witnesses to be interviewed. The Outstanding Service Award is presented to Records Clerk Janet Martin. Records Clerk Yolanda Martinez. In August 2011, detectives were assigned to investigate an aggravated criminal sexual sexual assault case in which a 12-year-old girl was sexually assaulted by a family acquaintance. Very little was known about the offender other than the name Jerry and his race. After exhaustive investigations, including a victim-sensitive interview, communication with other area law enforcement agencies, searching databases, and interviews with numerous people, the offender could not be identified. On 12/13/2012, Park Forest Police Department officers responded to a domestic disturbance and arrested a male subject who identified himself as Jerry Lonzo for domestic battery. He was brought to the police station, charged, and was waiting transportation for a bond hearing. Records clerk Yolanda Martinez was completing paperwork for court. Clerk Martinez, rather than just assembling the paperwork packets, reviewed all the paperwork and observed that the fingerprint response for Jerry Lonzo had possible NCIC hits as a prior reported felony. These hits are not uncommon and usually based on similarities in names and are not valid. But Clerk Martinez notified detectives of the information. It was learned that based on the fingerprints that the person identifying himself as Jerry Lonzo was actually Gerardo Gutierrez, a twice deported felon and non-compliant child sex offender. Based on the name that was provided, his description, and his history, detectives were notified, contacted the victim and her mother, and arranged for a physical lineup, which positively identified Gerardo as the offender known as Jerry. The offender was interviewed and admitted to sexually assaulting the child. Due to record clerk Martinez's professionalism, initiative, and attention to detail, a dangerous sexual predator and previous deported felon who might have otherwise never been arrested was discovered, and a victim of a sexual assault was able to find closure. The Outstanding Service Award is presented to Records Clerk Yolanda Martinez. Detective Paul Marash. Detective Marash will be receiving 2 Outstanding Service Awards. So please hold your applause until both awards have been read. On November 26, 2012, Park Forest Police responded to a strong-arm robbery that had just taken place on Orchard Drive. Officers located one of the offenders and he was taken into custody. Detective Marash was assigned to investigate. Detective Marash interviewed the offender, who had first denied any involvement. After the interview continued, the offender admitted his involvement and identified 2 other individuals as accomplices. Detective Marash looked at the property that the offender had in his possession when he was arrested and saw a computer mouse. Detective Marash was aware that a local school had been recently burglarized and a computer had been taken. Detective Marash went to the school and showed them the mouse, which they identified as the mouse that had been attached to the stolen computer. The offender and his 2 co-offenders, whom Detective Marash located and took into custody, were interviewed and gave statements that they had not only committed the robbery, but they had also committed the burglary at the school. One of the offenders showed Detective Marash where the computer had been hidden, and it was recovered. All 3 offenders were charged with burglary and robbery. As a result of his hard work in this case, Detective Marash was able to get 3 offenders charged with serious crimes, clear 2 open cases, and return stolen property to a school. On April 28, 2013, Park Forest Police responded to the intersection of Fur and Elm Street for a report of a person shot. Upon arrival, they found a 17-year-old male subject who had been shot in the groin area and in his hand. 1 shell casing was found at the scene. The victim stated that he only knew the first name of the offender. Detective Marash was assigned to investigate and responded to the scene. Detective Marash spoke to both the victim and his friend, who was also present. After obtaining information, as much information as possible, Detective Marash searched local law enforcement databases and spoke to officers from surrounding agencies and was able to establish suspects, 2 brothers who had recently moved to Park Forest. Photo arrays were conducted and the victims identified the brothers as the offenders. Further investigation revealed that both the brothers had fled the area and were staying in other areas of Illinois. Detective Rash traveled several hours away in an attempt to locate one of the offenders, and the offender was not located. Detective Rash enlisted the assistance of law enforcement agencies in that area to search for the offender. Shortly thereafter, the offender was located and brought back to Park Forest, with the second offender turning himself in shortly after hearing the arrest of his brother. After being interviewed at length, one of the offenders implicated the other. That offender refused to speak to police. Several other individuals who were present were located and identified the shooter through physical lineups. At the conclusion of the investigation, the offender was charged with attempted first-degree murder and is awaiting trial. The victim, who received approximately 70 staples in his abdomen, as well as sutures in his hand, is recovering. As a result of the intense investigative work conducted by Detective Rash, this case went from a shooting with a mildly cooperative victim who could only identify the offender by his first name to a cleared case with one of the offenders charged with attempted murder. 2 outstanding service awards are presented to Detective Paul Marash. Detective Corporal Tom Pizer. On April 25, 2013, Park Forest Police responded to 400 Rutledge Street for a report of a 19-year-old girl who had just been run over in the driveway. Responding officers found the victim lying on the ground in need of medical attention. She was later found to have a broken pelvis, 2 fractures to her spine, a fractured arm, several rib fractures, bruised lungs, and multiple areas of which her skin was peeled away from her body. The victim and witness identified the offender and the suspect vehicle. Both the vehicle and the offender were located in Matson. The offender was arrested and the vehicle impounded to be processed. Detective Corporal Tom Pizer, who had responded initially, was assigned as the lead investigator. He, along with other detectives, photographed the scene and spoke to the victim and witnesses. It was later learned that text messages had been sent from the offender to the victim. A search warrant was obtained to retrieve the messages. Detective Corporal Pizer pieced together the event that had transpired earlier in the day based on all the statements from the victim, witnesses, and even friends of the offender. The offender was interviewed and eventually admitted that she had intentionally run over the victim as a result of a long-standing dispute over a boyfriend. Detective Corporal Pizer convinced all witnesses to speak with representatives from the State's Attorney's Office. At the end of the investigation, the offender was charged with several counts of attempted murder. While new in his position as a supervisor in the investigations unit, Detective Corporal Pizer showed outstanding investigative skills during this incident. He had many witness statements that did not all paint the same picture of what had transpired. He was able to piece them together to get the truth. He had obtained the search warrants for technology items and was able to obtain a confession to a serious crime. As a result of the hard work and long hours, the offender was charged with attempted murder. His outstanding service award is presented to Corporal Tom Pizer. Detective Corporal Brian Reisky, now Commander Reisky. When this award was earned, Commander Reisky was serving at the rank of corporal in the Investigations Division. He has since been promoted to the rank of commander. On November 19, 2012, Park Forest Police responded to St. James Hospital in Chicago Heights for a report of a 16-month-old child that had been sexually assaulted, possibly by a family member. After the initial response to the hospital, detectives responded to the home of the child, and Detective Corporal Reisky was assigned as lead investigator. A search of the victim's house found bloody diapers in the trash, indicating that the sexual assault occurred inside the house. It was learned that a 19-year-old uncle was home with the victim earlier in the day when no other adults were present. The uncle was brought in for questioning. After a grueling, several-hour interview, the uncle admitted to Detective Corporal Reisky to sexually assaulting the infant. Despite the horrific nature of the crime, Corporal Reisky remained calm and developed rapport with the uncle throughout the felony review process, culminating in a written statement that was taken by a state's attorney. Despite there being no witness to the crime, and the uncle was charged with predatory criminal sexual assault of a child based upon the interview by Detective Corporal Reisky. The offender remains in jail awaiting trial. The outstanding service award is presented to Detective Corporal Brian Reisky.
What's up, guys?
Police Officer Paul Schumann. On April 25, 2013, Commander Menino provided officers with information of a wanted vehicle and person referenced an attempted murder that occurred in Richmond Park earlier in the day when the victim was reportedly stabbed, suffering life-threatening injuries. Officer Paul Schumann responded to an address on Blair Street, which was the location provided that the suspect may have fled to. Officer Schulman located the suspect vehicle to location and notified Richmond Park officers, while keeping the vehicle and residents under surveillance until they arrived. Officer Schulman assisted the officers in making contact with the resident where the offender was found and taken into custody. Additional evidence, including body clothing, was also recovered at the residence, and blood was found on the suspect vehicle. As a result of the quick arrest and recovery of crucial evidence, 4 people were charged with attempted murder. Officer Schulman's efforts played an integral part in the arrest and charging 4 people with attempted murder in Richmond Park. The Outstanding Service Award is presented to Police Officer Paul Schulman.
Police Officer Darren Scooter. On December 16, 2012, at approximately 2 a.m., Officer Darren Scooter was dispatched to 100 blocks of Dogwood Street, reference the subject pulling on car doors. Officer Scooter approached tactically, turning off his lights, parking distance away, and approaching the area on foot. Due to his approach, he discovered a 23-year-old park force man taking items from inside a vehicle in Fort B11. Officer Scooter took the man into custody and recovered numerous items that appeared to be stolen proceeds from additional crimes, including electronic devices, a credit card, and other items. Subsequent investigation revealed 6 burglary motor vehicles in the area, and the next day, victims responded to the police department and identified their property. Officer Scooter obtained a written confession from the offender, and he was subsequently charged with 6 felony counts of burglary motor vehicle. Due to his professional approach and his subsequent investigative skills, Officer Scooter was able to interrupt a felony crime as it occurred, clear a total of 6 felony cases, and return stolen property to the rightful owners. The Outstanding Service Award is presented to Officer Darren Scooter. Detective Christopher Vallow. Detective Vallow will be receiving 3 Outstanding Service Awards, so please hold your applause until all 3 awards have been read. On November 7, 2012, Detective Christopher Vallow was assigned to investigate a predatory criminal sexual assault of a 12-year-old victim who was also photographed naked by the offender. Detective Vallow responded to the hospital and spoke with the mother and learned that the suspect was the biological grandfather of the victim, who had just recently moved in with the victim and her mother. Detective Vallow and other officers immediately went to the victim's house and arrested the grandfather, who was interviewed and denied all allegations. It was learned, however, that he had 2 cell phones, which he stated he had lost one of them. The alleged lost phone was located by the victim's mother, wedged in a couch. Detective Vallow obtained a search warrant for the cell phone and located several naked photographs of females, including several of what appeared to be the victim. None of the photographs contained any faces. Detective Vallow, knowing that the suspect was not being honest, decided to bring the victim's mother into the interview. That tactic, though unusual, was successful as the offender gave a statement that led him to be charged with Class 6 felonies of predatory criminal sexual assault and child pornography. It was also learned that he had an outstanding arrest warrant from West Virginia for failure to register as a sex offender. Detective Vallow continued this investigation even after charges were approved by taking the cell phone to the Regional Computer Forensic Laboratory in Chicago, where they were able to recover more detailed photographs, allowing them to differentiate between naked photographs of the victim and other females. The offender was also later indicted on 9 Class 6 felonies and 9 Class 1 felonies, all pertaining to Detective Vallow's thorough investigation. On January 29, 2013, a 15-year-old boy was riding a skateboard on the sidewalk in the library. When the boy got off the skateboard to allow 4 or 5 subjects to pass, he was struck by 2 of the subjects, causing him to fall to the ground. The 2 subjects then demanded the boy give up his iPod and PSP, which he complied. All the subjects then fled on foot and were unable to be located by responding officers. Within the hour, Detective Christopher Vallow drove the victim, who lived in the Eastgate neighborhood, home. Detective Vallow began patrolling the Eastgate area and noticed 3 subjects matching the description of the offenders. Detective Vallow made contact with the subjects and noticed they were acting nervous and had blood in their clothing. Detective Vallow conducted a protective pat-down of the subjects and located the stolen PSP from one of the adult subjects. A show-up was conducted with the victim, who positively identified the subjects, who were taken into custody and transported to the police department. During a custodial search, the victim's iPod was located on one of the juvenile subjects. Detective Vallow obtained a written statement from all 3 subjects admitting to the incident, which resulted in 2 of the subjects being charged with robbery and the other subject used as a witness. Due to his expertise and attention to detail, a violent robbery of a juvenile was solved within hours of occurring. On July 25, 2013, Park Forest Police were notified that a 15-year-old female had cried out that her grandfather had sexually molested her when she was much younger. The initial report was taken and Detective Christopher Vallow was assigned. Detective Vallow set up a victim-sensitive interview, or VSI, in which the victim related that her grandfather had sexually assaulted and abused her between 6 and 8 years prior when she lived at a different residence in Park Forest. Neither the victim nor her mother knew the grandfather's current whereabouts, having had no contact with him in several years. Detective Vallow investigated and found the grandfather was possibly living in Chicago Heights. On August 8th, Detective Vallow located and arrested the offender in Chicago Heights and, utilizing a Spanish-speaking officer from another agency as a translator, interviewed the grandfather. During the outcry and interview, it was learned that the grandfather had also molested another child when he lived in Chicago Heights. Detective Vallow contacted the Chicago Heights Police Department and had a detective respond. During the interview, the grandfather admitted to sexually molesting his granddaughter and another child. The offender also confessed to the Assistant State's Attorney, who responded to review the case. As a result, the offender was charged with predatory criminal sexual assault of a child for both Detective Vallow case and the Chicago Heights case. In addition, he was charged with numerous counts of aggravated criminal sexual abuse for both cases. He is awaiting trial, being held without bond. Detective Vallow was assigned to a case that was nearly impossible to solve. The alleged crime had been committed at least 6 years prior to being reported. The crime scene was no longer available. There was no physical evidence. There were no eyewitnesses, nor even anyone who could corroborate the victim's statements. The whereabouts of the suspect were not known, and the suspect spoke little English. Despite all these hurdles, Detective Vallow investigated and had the crime solved and the offender charged within 2 weeks. 3 outstanding service awards are presented to Detective Christopher Vallow. Administrative Assistant Kathy Wellington.
Happy birthday.
By law, certain convicted subjects are required to register in the Village of Park Forest as sex offenders or violent offenders against youth. Most of the work associated with monitoring these individuals has to do with paperwork and determining registration dates and dates the subject will be to register by. Until recently, this monitoring consumed a great deal of time due to having to view each paper file separately in the records area of the department. Administrative Assistant Kathy Wellington became involved with a solution to address this time-consuming issue. Over the course of 3 months with Corporal Elliott, who was in charge of the program, providing advice and information on what would be needed for such a system, Kathy Wellington worked tirelessly in developing a computer-based program for monitoring of sex offenders. The system is now in place and being used successfully. This provides immediate access to the information needed on a regular basis. It can be viewed by administration personnel at any time they choose. Kathy Wellington is being commended for developing a working program that is cutting the time needed by a supervisor to monitor state mandated requirements from hours a week to minutes each week. The Outstanding Service Award is presented to Administrative Assistant Kathy Wellington. Police Officer Christopher Wyden. On June 9, 2013, Officer Christopher Wyden was investigating a residential burglary which occurred at 2 Dunlap Road where televisions were taken. Officer Wyden was aware this was an ongoing issue involving a suspect who was a landlord who also owned 10 Michael Road. Officer Wyden checked 10 Michael Road and discovered that the deadbolt lock was knocked out and lying on the floor. A canvass was conducted and Officer Wyden learned the landlord was seen at the residence of 10 Michael Road earlier in the day. When Officer Wyden had previously taken damage to property reports at 2 Dunlap and 10 Michael, and was aware both residents had their vehicle tires slashed and both suspected this landlord. There were no witnesses to the crime. Officer Wyden prepared a wanted flyer for the landlord and he was subsequently located and arrested on June 20th, driving the area of the properties. A damaged deadbolt was located beside his vehicle. Officer Wyden responded to the police station on his day off and began interviewing the suspect for entering 10 Michael Road without permission of the tenants. Officer Wyden obtained the tenant's keys of 2 Dunlap and confirmed the deadbolt located in the suspect's vehicle came from that residence. On June 21st, 2013, again on his day off, Officer Wyden and Detective Paul Marash interviewed the suspect, who ultimately confessed to entering both residences without permission from his tenants. The suspect also admitted to slashing the tenant's vehicle tires because he was upset with them. The suspect was charged with 2 counts each of felony CDP and criminal trespass for residence. Officer Wyden has been commended for his excellent interviewing skills that led to a confession from the suspect and enabled him to ultimately charge the landlord. Officer Wyden was able to clear a total of 5 cases and put an end to an ongoing problem in the village. The Outstanding Service Award is presented to Police Officer Christopher Wyden. Detective Commander Paul Winfrey. In December of 2012, Detective Commander Paul Winfrey developed a strong working relationship with the owner of Recycling America, located in South Chicago Heights. Commander Winfrey informed the owner of several suspects who were committing burglaries in Park Forest. On January 23rd of 2013, the owner contacted Commander Winfrey and advised him that one of those subjects was at his business attempting to scrap metal. That same subject was already wanted for questioning pertaining to a burglary. Commander Winfrey, along with other detectives, immediately responded to the place of business and observed the suspect leave the vehicle, which was stopped and was placed in custody. Commander Winfrey interviewed the subject and gave a written confession admitting to several burglaries which occurred in Park Forest. Commander Winfrey continued to interview him about other criminal activity he may have been aware of. The subject informed Commander Winfrey that he was aware of numerous armed robberies which recently occurred in several towns, and supplied Commander Winfrey names of approximately 6 to 8 offenders who were also involved. Commander Winfrey notified Chicago Heights and Chicago, interviewed the subjects, and were able to gain even more detailed information about the robberies. The subject was originally going to be used as a key witness to the robberies, but it was later learned through further investigation that he himself had participated in the robberies. He was charged along with subjects he had identified and numerous counts of armed robbery in several different towns. Due to his ability to develop rapport with people from business owners to suspects, combined with his diligence in investigations, Detective Commander Winfrey was able to clear a string of burglaries in Park Forest and provide the leads which led to the clearance of robberies in Chicago Heights and Chicago. The Outstanding Service Award is presented to Detective Commander Paul Winfrey. Police Officers Jason Walski and Catherine Singer. Officer Singer has joined the Drug Enforcement Agency and will not be attending today due to being in the DEA Academy. During the early morning hours of May 30th, 2013, Officer Jason Walski observed a vehicle parked unoccupied in the parking lot of a closed business. He recalled only a short time earlier that his vehicle was not in this location. There have been several thefts of catalytic converters committed from the business in that area, and information related to such thefts was disseminated regarding suspects possibly parking their vehicles in closed businesses. Armed with knowledge of this information, Officer Walski investigated further. He observed the vehicle's keys left in ignition and also heard what sounded like a power tool being operated in the area of U-Haul. Officer Walski requested additional units. When they arrived, he and the other officers tactically approached U-Haul. One offender was immediately observed and attempted to flee on foot to a field. Officer Captain Singer pursued and apprehended him after a short foot pursuit. The other officers, still hearing the sound of a power tool, continued to search for more involved subjects. During the search, Officer Walski observed a second offender hiding between two U-Haul trucks. This subject was arrested and both were transported to the police department for additional investigation. An inventory search of the vehicle revealed additional evidence linked to the crime. Ultimately, the offenders were charged with 1 count each of felony theft of this incident, plus they were positively identified as the offenders of a similar incident that occurred a month earlier at the U-Haul repair shop. The proactive patrol by Officer Walski and the response catching of a fleeing subject by Officer Singer resulted in the clearance by arrest of a particularly frustrating property crime plaguing the area. Both subjects were charged with 1 count of theft. The Outstanding Service Award is presented to Police Officer Jason Walski and Catherine Singer. We will now be moving to Outstanding Service Awards presented to 2 more officers. Commander Scott Sheets, Corporal Todd Bialke, Police Officers Alex Regan, and Captain Singer. On November 19, 2012, Commander Scott Sheets, Corporal Todd Bialke, and Officers Captain Singer, Alex Regan, and Tim Hoskins responded to the area of 135 Algonquin after a report of several shots being fired. After arriving at that location in the midst of forming a perimeter, shots were heard being fired east of the location, and a conflicting call now had the incident occurring at 158 Algonquin, 13 houses away. The above officers ran to the area of 158 Algonquin, immediately found the SHIELD team, which confronted the offender, who was standing in the open doorway but refused to follow the command to show his hand and step outside. After several tense moments, the offender complied with directions being given and was taken into custody. There were several firearms recovered, and the offender was eventually charged with several felony crimes against persons. These officers are commended for their fluid and professional response to a rapidly changing and dangerous event, which ultimately led to the successful conclusion of a potentially deadly encounter. The Outstanding Service Awards presented to Commander Scott Sheets, Corporal Todd Bialke, and Police Officers Alex Bregan and Catherine Singer. Christopher Vallow, and Paul Moran. February 28, 2013, patrol officers were dispatched to 300 Selmanock referenced multiple dogs running at large. Officers found the residence to be unsecure with a broken window and items strewn about the kitchen floor. While on scene, an extremely battered female victim ran up to the officers and stated she had been sexually assaulted and battered both inside and outside her home by two subjects armed with a gun and a knife. The offenders then forced the victim inside the backseat of her vehicle and drove her around, compelling her to withdraw money from several banks and ATM machines. Detective Commander Paul Winfrey was notified and directed Detectives John DeSoe and Christopher Vallow to immediately respond to the scene and take command of it. He further requested the Illinois State Crime Scene to respond for processing. Within the next 24 hours, Commander Winfrey, now joined by Detective Corporal Brian Reisky and Detective Paul Marash, began an intensive follow-up. Detectives began contacting the banks and learned of exact times and location where the victim's credit cards were used. Commander Winfrey went to several gas stations and viewed video surveillance, which captured the offenders and vehicle being used. While investigating, it was learned that the victim's credit card was actively being used in the area of Olympia Fields in Chicago Heights. Commander Winfrey broadcast a description and requested area units to respond in locating the vehicle. Commander Winfrey subsequently located the vehicle and its occupants matching the description driving on Route 30, which was stopped with the assistance of Olympia Field detective. The vehicle was stopped and the occupants, one adult and the other juvenile, were taken into custody after proceeds from the crime were located inside the car, along with items from the victim's home. Corporal Reisky and Detective Vallow interviewed the adult offender who admitted using the victim's credit card, then refused to speak and requested an attorney. Corporal Reisky and Detective Vallow contacted the juvenile's mother who responded at the station. After a very lengthy interview, the juvenile provided a full confession, admitting to all the crimes the victim reported while his mother was present in the interview room. He further provided a written statement to the assistant state's attorney and gave detectives permission to search his home, where the gun used by the offenders and more proceeds taken from the victim's house were recovered. Detectives obtained search warrants for oral and genital swabs, the offender's vehicle, and the adult offender's residence. They worked side by side with the Illinois State Police crime scene investigators and handling over 100 pieces of evidence. The investigation unit worked relentlessly and efficiently around the clock as a team utilizing various investigative techniques that resulted in the successful apprehension of the offenders, who were ultimately charged with 142 felony counts. The Outstanding Service Award is presented to Commander Paul Winfrey, Corporal Brian Reisky, Detective John DeSoe, Christopher Vallow, and Paul Marash. And Charlie Hoskins. On February 23rd, 2013, at approximately 5 o'clock in the morning, officers responded to the call of a driver slumped to the steering wheel of a stopped vehicle on 26th Street at Allegheny. Officer Paul Schulman and Officer Charlie Hoskins attempted to wake the driver who began to drive away, but who again passed out while the locked vehicle was still moving and didn't drive. Officer Schulman and Officer Hoskins forced entry in the moving vehicle and were able to reach in and place the vehicle in the park. The driver and passenger, both severely under the influence of alcohol, were taken into custody and an open bottle of tequila was recovered. After investigation, the driver, a 37-year-old Park Forest man, was charged with DUI and multiple traffic offenses. The passenger, a 37-year-old Country Club Hills man, was issued a citation for illegal transportation of cultivation alcohol. Both officers sustained minor injuries while forcing entry into the moving vehicle. Officer Schulman and Hoskins should be commended for their quick action in an attempt to prevent harm to a passed-out motorist and passenger in a moving vehicle. Had they failed to act, it is likely that the vehicle would have been in an imminent traffic crash, possibly even endangering other motorists in the path of a moving vehicle with no conscious operator. With this regard for their own safety, they acted quickly and brought immediate resolution to this potentially volatile incident. The Outstanding Service Award is presented to police officers Paul Schulman and Charlie Hoskins. Department Police Officer Scott Metzger. On June 7, 2013, around midnight, Park Forest police units were dispatched to a robbery that just occurred at 406 Winnebago Street. A canine assist was requested in order to start a track, and Olympia Field Police Officer Scott Metzger responded to the scene. Officer Jason Walski assisted Officer Metzger with the canine track to travel eastbound to Wildwood, then southbound to Lakewood, and then turn eastbound again. The track continued until the officers noticed a subject in the shadows within the house of 514 and 516 Lakewood. Officers confronted the subject, who was noted to have clothing described by the victim that was similar to that worn by the offender. The subject gave an inconsistent account of his reason for being in the area. A show-up was conducted and the victim positively identified the subject as an offender. A subsequent search revealed the victim's keys were in the offender's pockets. Both officers showed a diligent effort during the tracking of the subject over a lengthy distance. When the subject was located, both officers did an outstanding job of conducting the stop and field interview, getting critical information that led to the identification of the subject for an aggravated felony. This led to the identification of multiple offenders and the clearing of another robbery. This effort is especially notable considering Officer Walski had only recently completed field training at the time of this incident. The Outstanding Service Award is presented to Police Officer Jason Walski and Olympia Field Police Officer Scott Metzger. Corporal Todd Bielke, Police Officers Timothy Hoskins and Alex Reed. On June 5th, 2013, around 4 in the morning, Corporal Todd Bielke was conducting a premise exam at U-Haul due to numerous previous thefts. Corporal Bielke noted a vehicle parked in the daycare across the street from U-Haul and immediately notified other officers to respond to the area. As Corporal Bielke approached the vehicle, which was occupied, the driver began driving away and appeared to be talking on a cell phone. Corporal Bielke stopped the vehicle with Officer Alex Breen assisting. Officer Timothy Hoskins arrived and began checking the U-Haul lot. Officer Hoskins located two subjects attempting to hide under a vehicle on the east side of the lot, and the subjects immediately ran in opposite directions when he confronted them. Officer Hoskins and Officer Breen chased after one subject and fled into a wooded area. Both officers continued to pursue the subject, who was apprehended after running into a shallow pond. While further investigating the scene, officers located several catalytic converters stacked inside the U-Haul fence lot along with cutting tools. As officers checked the scene, a subject who was observed walking on the sidewalk on the east side of U-Haul was stopped and detained after it was determined that he was the third suspect. All suspects later were charged with the theft in this incident, as well as a similar theft that occurred 3 nights earlier. Due to Corporal Bielke's proactive policing and the aggressive response of Officer Hoskins and Breen, a recurring crime that has a negative impact on Park Forest business was interrupted in the act and the offenders arrested. The Outstanding Service Award is presented to Corporal Todd Bielke and Police Officers Timothy Hoskins and Alex Breen. Police Officers Paul Schulman, Justin Romowski, Christopher Wyden, and Michael McHugh. On Sunday, September 8, 2013, at about 3 a.m., Officers Michael McHugh, Paul Schulman, Justin Romowski, Christopher Wyden, and Corporal P.J. Boland responded to report of a motorcycle accident with injuries on Stock Trail near Indian Boulevard. Officer Wyden was the first to arrive on the scene and found one subject deceased. Corporal Boland arrived, and he and Officer Wyden found a second subject who still showed signs of life. They assisted the Park Forest paramedic with triage of the second subject's injuries before he was quickly taken from the scene and taken to the hospital where he later died. During this time, Officer Schulman and Officer Romowski arrived on scene and immediately began blocking the roadway, helping to secure the scene and creating a safe environment for the paramedics to operate in. Corporal Bolden notified the SMART team for activation. Officer Matudis arrived on scene and immediately began to canvass the area, successfully locating 2 witnesses of the accident, interviewing the witnesses, and keeping them on scene until they could be interviewed again by SMART investigators. Later that same morning, Officer Romowski and Officer Matudis accepted the unpleasant assignment of responding to the hospital and making a death notification to the families of both subjects who passed away as a result of the accident, providing the comfort they could, at one point hugging one victim's inconsolable mother and sister. The officers should be commended for the professional response to an extremely chaotic and tragic motor vehicle accident resulting in the death of 2 young men. From accident scene investigation and management to notifying the family members of their loved one's death, the officers dedicated to professional conduct is an outstanding representation of the Park Forest Police Department during a very difficult scene. The Outstanding Service Award is presented to Corporal T.J. Bolden and Police Officers Paul Schulman, Justin Romowski, Christopher Wyden, and Michael Mathias. Corporal Lee Elliott, Police Officer John Schweitzer. At the time this award was earned, Corporal Schweitzer was the rank of police officer. He has since been promoted to the rank of corporal. On July 28, 2013, officers were dispatched to the 3600 block of Western Avenue in reference to a disturbance. Upon arrival, a vehicle left the scene at a high rate of speed and Corporal Lee Elliott attempted to stop that vehicle. The vehicle fled but crashed with the driver fleeing on foot. Corporal Elliott took 2 passengers into custody and recovered 21 grams of cannabis. Corporal Elliott was able to determine the identity of the driver, learn that he had an arrest warrant for Indiana, and quickly broadcast this information to other responding officers. Officer John Schweitzer began a search for the driver, including checking his last known residence, then began back-checking and eventually located him in the area of the original call. Officer Schweitzer attempted to take him into custody, but the driver resisted arrest with such force that the deployment of a baton and taser were required to subdue him. After an investigation, the driver was charged in Cook County with felony fleeing and eluding, was processed with an Indiana arrest warrant, and an arrest warrant for delivery of cannabis was obtained in Will County. Due to their quick response, professional actions, and patient persistence, a wanted drug dealer who initiated a dangerous vehicle pursuit with police and then fled on foot was eventually located, taken into custody, and charged with felonies in 2 Illinois counties, and an Indiana arrest warrant was served. The Outstanding Service Award is presented to Corporal Lee Elliott and Police Officer John Schweitzer. Commander Scott Sheets, Corporal Todd Bialke, Detective Christopher Vallow and Paul Marash, Police Officers Robert Johnson, Catherine Singer, and William Bussey. Officer Bussey has since taken a job with the Joliet Police Department and will not be here today. On May 7, 2013, the Park Forest Police responded to the 100 block of Washington Street for a report of shots fired at people. Responding officers led by Commander Scott Sheets immediately established a perimeter and began identifying victims and witnesses. While they were getting initial information, Corporal Todd Bialke located a subject running through the yards. This subject told Corporal Bialke that he was in fact a victim. While Corporal Bialke was speaking to the subject, Officer Bussey spoke to the complainant, who identified the shooter by nickname Mello. Officer William Bussey knew the subject, whom Corporal Bialke had stopped, used the same nickname and informed Corporal Bialke, who took the subject in custody. Officer Robert Johnson and Officer Catherine Singer identified independent witnesses and helped identify the offenders. Detectives Paul Marash and Christopher Vallow assisted with interviewing victims and witnesses and searched the area where the incident occurred and where the offender was located. In a garbage can behind one of the houses, Detective Vallow located a .357 Magnum revolver. Detectives Vallow and Marash interviewed the offender, a convicted felon, and were able to obtain a confession in which he admitted to shooting at the residence. Physical lineups were conducted and the offender was charged with multiple counts of aggravated discharge of a firearm and unlawful use of a weapon by a firearm. Working together to form a quick and professional response to a shooting, the patrol ship and detectives could peacefully piece together this violent incident, resulting in a convicted felon being sent back to prison and bringing a successful conclusion to a dangerous event. The Outstanding Service Awards presented to Commander Scott Sheets, Corporal Todd Bailey, Detectives Christopher Battle and Paul Morash, and Police Officers Robert Johnson, Catherine Singer, and William Bussey. Police Officers Christopher Wyden and Michael Matthews. On October 18, 2013, Park Forest officers responded to Area 7-Eleven convenience store for a reported armed robbery in progress. Officers Michael Matthews and Christopher Wyden were the first to arrive on scene. They observed the offender run westbound across Central Park from the 7-Eleven towards Richland Park Car Wash. Officers chased after the offender and cornered him behind the car wash, where he was apprehended after a tense moment where he reached into his jacket and it was unknown if he still had a weapon on him. Evidence from the armed robbery was recovered of the offender, but not the weapon used. The description for an accomplice was given to the officer, and a short time later, Officer Wyden advised over the radio that he observed a subject matching the accomplice's description walking the area of 7-Eleven. Officer Wyden, along with backup units, approached the subject, detaining him until he was positively identified as being involved. Evidence related to the armed robbery was recovered from this subject as well. Officers Matthews and Wyden and assistant detectives in searching the area where the first offender was apprehended by supplying the detectives with details regarding the movements made by the offender as he ran in the direction that he traveled. This information allowed the area that needed to be searched to be minimized, and they were able to locate the firearm that the first offender used to commit the robbery. Once confronted with recovered evidence and the information learned during this investigation, the offender confessed. He was subsequently charged with the Class 6 felony of armed robbery. Due to their professional and tactical response, an armed robber was caught in the moments of committing this crime in a public area and a weapon recovered. The Outstanding Service Awards presented to police officers Christopher Wyden and Michael Matthews. Commander Michael Law, Corporal Lee Elliott, police officers Thomas Naughton, Darren Scooter, Charlie Hoskins, Jonathan Garrity, and Jeremy Sparakis. On October 20, 2013, Park Forest Commander Michael Law, Corporal Lee Elliott, police officers Thomas Naughton, Darren Scooter, Charlie Hoskins, Jonathan Garrity, and Jeremy Sparakis responded to 319 Todd for a disturbance where no one was involved. The caller was frantic and limited information was provided about the exact nature of the situation. Officers arrived at the scene and were immediately met by two family members fleeing from inside the residence. Officers, including two new probationary officers, immediately, without hesitation, entered into a residence not knowing if there was still an active shooter inside. Officers located and removed several family members, including a 3-year-old girl, from the scene. Officers began checking the interior of the residence for possible offenders and victims, and subsequently located a male and female, both shot, in the rear bedroom. A gun was located nearby. Paramedics were summoned, however, the injuries were fatal. The residents in the front yard were immediately secured as a crime scene, and the investigations commander was notified. Officers began obtaining vital information about the occupants of the residence and further information about the incident, which was forwarded to investigators. While the event was unfolding, 50 to 75 family members and friends of the family began arriving on the block, creating a large, emotionally charged crowd. Cars were parking on both sides of Todd and Berry Streets. Responding family and friends were becoming increasingly emotional and unruly. The officers, working as a cohesive team, began to slowly expand and extend the crime scene across the street to separate the crowd from the offenders. Crime scene investigators, medical examiners, and other personnel. They were able to further locate and remove the original occupants of the residence from the crowd and elicit their cooperation, reporting to the Park Forest Police Department to be interviewed by investigators. The officers are to be commended for their response to a chaotic situation that they controlled by securing the crime scene and removing innocent subjects to safety. They then used their verbal skills to develop a rapport with both victims and responding community family members to keep a potentially explosive situation from getting further out of control. While the situation had a tragic ending of a murder-suicide, The officers working together as a team were able to complete their mission and prevent any others from being harmed in the crime scene protected. The Outstanding Service Award is presented to Commander Michael Ball, Corporal Lee Elliott, and police officers Thomas Naughton, Darren Studer, Charlie Hopkins, Jonathan Garrity, and Jeremy Spratis. We will now present the term award. The term award is to be awarded to the most outstanding member during each quarter who has performed in a consistently superior fashion. For the first term, Police Officer Justin Romowski. Throughout the first term, Officer Justin Romowski has demonstrated outstanding performance at multiple levels. For the first term of 2013, Officer Romowski led patrol officers in wide tickets, vehicle seizures, and case reports written. Most significantly, however, was Officer Romowski's aggressiveness in DUI enforcement, making numerous quality arrests. Additionally, Officer Romowski attended specialized DUI training at his own request, and enabled by that training, developed an improved DUI report that has been implemented within the agency, improving the quality of the department's report and greatly assisting in DUI prosecutions. Additionally, Officer Romowski planned and implemented department-wide roll call training to train officers on the use of that report, as well as the use of HEN and advanced tests to detect impaired driving. Fueled by his passion for DUI enforcement, Officer Romowski took self-initiated action, which has resulted in his emerging authority in DUI enforcement and the betterment of the department as a whole in combating impaired driving. Officer Romowski is commended for his well-rounded patrol work, which is evidenced by his aggressive enforcement of traffic laws, the seizure of suspect vehicles, as well as the more mundane but no less important task of writing reports. Furthermore, his self-initiated interest in DUI enforcement this past term has led not only to his increased personal knowledge in detection and prosecution of DUIs, but more importantly, has led the department as a whole being better equipped to take drunk drivers off the streets of our forest. The term award for the first term of 2013 is presented to Police Officer Justin Romowski. For the second term, Detective Paul Marash. Throughout the second term of 2013, Detective Paul Marash exemplified his role as a seasoned investigator with the Park Forest Police Department. Detective Marash's investigative techniques and resilience while investigating a variety of crimes were clearly on display throughout the term. On one occasion, Detective Marash was investigating a residential burglary and learned the possible suspect may have been taken into custody for an unrelated crime in another neighboring jurisdiction. He interviewed several suspects and obtained written statements that implicated all suspects to that residential burglary, as well as another one. In another instance, an elderly victim was battered and robbed of personal belongings by approximately 7 to 8 subjects. Detective Marash was able to speak with one subject who was already in custody and gave a vague suspect description for the other individuals involved. Detective Marash's tenacity led to the identification of other suspects who he located, interviewed, and obtained written statements from, leading to 4 of them being charged. Additionally, Detective Marash investigated an aggravated discharge of a firearm case in which a suspect was ultimately charged with attempt murder. Detective Marash was able to quickly learn the suspect's information and coordinate with other law enforcement agencies to bring those cases to swift resolution. In yet another case, Detective Marash learned from a confidential informant that proceeds from a residential burglary were located at a suspect's home. Detective Marash secured a search warrant for the residence and was able to arrest and charge the subject with unlawful use of a weapon by a felon. Detective Marash is an extremely resourceful detective, utilizing various law enforcement databases and techniques, as well as reaching out to numerous law enforcement contacts to assist in any investigation he's working on. Detective Marash's tenacity and willingness to obtain written statements from suspects was superb in the second quarter, which led to the clearance of several violent felony crimes. The term award for the second term of 2013 is presented to Detective Paul Morash. For the third term and the fourth term, Police Officer Alex Regan. Please hold your applause until both term awards have been read. For the third quarter, Officer Alex Regan continued a high level of performance as he demonstrated all year. He consistently manages investigations efficiently, needing little guidance from others and taking his cases to their conclusion. He has also become more adept at cultivating informants, several times getting valuable information after making a minor arrest, including the recovery of a firearm. Officer Regan showed a very high level of traffic enforcement, especially wide tickets, which he wrote 91, 18 traffic misdemeanors, and he seized 11 vehicles, leading the department. This aggressive enforcement attitude led to numerous arrests, including Class X arrests for manufactured delivery of a controlled substance, which over an ounce of cocaine and more than $1,000 cash was recovered and seized. In addition to this traffic productivity, Officer Regan maintained his assigned calls for service and follow-up investigations admirably. In addition, Officer Regan regularly made himself available for extra assignments, always arriving early for a shift, and always properly prepared for duty. For the first two terms, Officer Regan achieved an outstanding level of performance. In the third term, he pushed his performance envelope even further. His consistent performance combined with his excellent attitude has made him worthy of the term award. And for the fourth term, Officer Alex Regan maintained a high level of performance for the fourth quarter, showing aggressive activity in many areas, including traffic enforcement, street encounters, and general enforcement, as well as proactive investigations. He was at the top of the department in traffic enforcement, as well as assigned investigations. During the quarter, Officer Regan initiated several investigations into suspect narcotics activity. In 4 of these investigations, while maintaining his typical assigned duties, needing very little assistance to manage all these matters, which is especially noteworthy when it's considered that Officer Regan has less than 2 years' experience. Officer Regan has achieved an outstanding level of performance this past quarter. He has displayed consistent, aggressive performance as a positive example for every officer. The term award for the fourth term of 2013 is presented to Police Officer Alex Regan. Police Officer David Habecker. Five years of service, Detective Paul Morash. Five years of service, Police Officer Justin Romowski. You will notice on your program there is no one listed for 10 years of service. However, that would be my brother who we simply left off. So 10 years of service, Detective John Menino. For 15 years of service, Commander Paul Winfrey. Also for 15 years of service, Corporal James Varga. For 25 years of service, Commander Scott Sheets. And for 30 years of service, Chief of Police, Clifford Bucks.
10 more to go.
The meritorious service awards for service rendered in the line of duty with an officer because of his or her initiative, diligence, and perseverance performed a difficult act in which a crime is prevented, life saved, property protected, and criminal apprehended. Police Officer Timothy Hoskins. On November 19, 2012, Park Forest police officers were dispatched to 135 Algonquin Street in reference to shots fired during a domestic dispute. On arrival, officers heard another shot fired but were unable to determine where it came from. While setting a perimeter at 135 Algonquin, conflicting information was received from the caller regarding the incident location. Officer Timothy Hoskins was sent to check the area east by Algonquin and locate the actual incident's location at 150 Algonquin Street. Officer Hoskins observed the caller and two other victims in the driveway. Upon exiting the squad and speaking with the victims, the offender stepped into the front doorway of the home. Officer Hoskins immediately moved the victims to a position of safety, drew his weapon, took a position of cover behind the vehicle in the driveway, and confronted the subject, who continued to verbally engage the victims in the driveway. Officer Hoskins notified officers of the location of the offender and drew the suspect's attention away from the victims and toward himself, allowing the SHIELD team to quickly assemble. The subject began to respond to Officer Hoskins but refused to obey his commands to surrender. During the exchange, the subject stepped from the doorway and it was observed he had no weapons in his hands. The SHIELD team moved forward and Officer Hoskins subdued the subject, who was taken into custody. Several weapons were seized in the ensuing investigation. The offender was charged with multiple felony counts. Officer Hoskins found himself in a potentially life-threatening situation with several victims in harm's way. He acted quickly and professionally, protecting the victims while confronting the subject, who had already fired a weapon at others. Officer Hoskins remained composed, giving the subject clear and concise commands, which resulted in the subject eventually being taken into custody with no further harm or violence. The Meritorious Service Award is presented to Police Officer Timothy Hoskins.
All right, what did we learn today? We learned in order to be a Park Forest policeman, you have to have 2 children, preferably the same sex. They have to be under the age of 5. It's amazing how many small children there are on this police department now. And out of our big award, each year for the past 28, we have picked a member of our department whose achievements for the past year are a little more outstanding than the rest. The awards board first selects 3 officers from those who have received awards or who have been nominated for Officer of the Year, and then the entire police department gets to vote on who they believe should receive that honor. I've always been proud of the fact that we as a group decide who the Officer of the Year is. Not the chief of police, not the senior staff of the awards board, not the village manager, but every single member of our police department. This year was once again a very tough decision, as we had 3 excellent officers on the final 3. They were John DeSole, Chris Vallow, and Alex Breeden. The Officer of the Year award should be made to the officer who best exemplifies by his or her performance the principles and purposes of both the law and the Park Forest Police Department. Those officers receiving awards during the year are automatically considered. Any other officer may be considered by the awards board or be nominated by any member of the police department. The board, when considering nominees, shall review the record of the nominee with special attention given to the preceding year. Such factors as performance as measured by evaluations and commander's observations, attendance, appearance, dedication to duty, and efforts toward self-improvement will be considered. Police Officer Alex Breeden, please step up. During the past year, and coincidentally his first full year of solo patrol, Officer Alex Breeden has proven to be a hardworking, dedicated, and tireless police officer. Officer Breeden gives 100% effort in every aspect of police work and has distinguished himself as one of the most well-rounded and aggressive officers on the police department. In the past year, Officer Breeden has serviced 14 active warrants, administratively seized 45 vehicles for criminal activity and has arrested 71 separate offenders for various misdemeanor and felony crimes. Officer Regan's aggressive work does not take away from his normal patrol duties. He has written one of the highest number of investigative reports, and his ability to work within a team concept clearly reflects this. Officer Regan goes beyond his duties to assist fellow officers with their investigations, processing, and paperwork. He has routinely effected quality narcotics arrests and is always looking beyond just the mere recovery itself. Officer Regan makes himself available for extra duty and routinely locates offenders for both patrol and the investigations divisions. He regularly utilizes the department gym and is dedicated to his health and fitness. Officer Regan is to be commended for his tireless work ethic and self-motivation as he works the mid-part course of repeat offenders and routinely self-initiates lengthy investigations. Officer Regan conducts himself in a soft-spoken manner and goes about his work with an energy unequal to patrol. Officer Regan goes beyond the call of duty to help citizens in any way he can. In one instance, Officer Regan responded to a routine 911 call and discovered that the woman who had dialed in error was trying to reach a garage door repairman. Instead of leaving the scene, he helped the woman by utilizing his civilian skill set and fixed the door for her. The Officer of the Year award shall be made to the officer who best exemplifies by his or her performance the principles and purposes of the law in the Park Forest Police Department. That officer for 2013 is clearly Police Officer Alex Regan. Please stand.
At this time, the senior command staff would like to salute you for all the hard work you do, the dedication shown, the professionalism you exhibit, and the fine men and women that you are. Command staff, present arms. Officers, present arms. Order, arms. Command staff, please move along the wall. Would everyone please rise as the colors are retrieved? Officers, present arms.